Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm Manson Music Codes from Eddie Conway. And to update you on Eddie Conway is doing good. And I keep emphasizing that hopefully we'll have him make a cameo appearance on his show that he created. When we think of Labor Day, and we think of like more about along the lines of a holiday, but Labor Day came into existence as a result of a bloody encounter in the 1800s when workers was protesting against the inhumane working conditions in Chicago. And during that time, the big capitalists had control over the labor and the police and utilized the police to beat people back into submission. Here to talk about labor and the prison movement is Mike Sainato. Hey, Mike, introduce yourself to the Rattling the Bars viewers and listeners.
I'm Michael Sainato. I'm a journalist based in Gainesville, Florida, and I'm a frequent contributor to The Guardian and also to the Real News Network. And, I primarily cover, labor issues, but obviously prison labor is just one of those intersecting with criminal justice that has been a topic that I've covered over the years. And, I think it's, really important and doesn't get a lot of attention, unfortunately.
Yeah, you're correct. Okay, let's look at, we have Labor Day coming up, and we know that Labor Day came into existence as a result of a bloody encounter. So when we look at the concept of labor and Labor Day, and we're celebrating basically the brutalization of workers and their rights and people's rights to unionize. That's basically what we're celebrating, the brutalization of workers under capitalist, fascist, imperialist system and their right to be treated as human beings. Mike, talk about the labor movement. Let's go from that point. Let's go from there and talk about how you see the labor movement today. And then we're going to making a comparison, juxtaposing that against what we know to be the lack thereof in prison. Go ahead.
Well, just to characterize the labor movement today, just based on data from the NLRB and just anecdotally, because the labor movement isn't just labor unions, although they get characterized synonymously. It's much bigger than that. And I think coming out of the pandemic, we're seeing a resurgence of the labor movement, a big popularity among groups of workers and individuals. I think people are more interested in, introspection of their work, what that means for their life, the work-life balance, working conditions, obviously wages, and having, that voice in the workplace, that, expanding democracy into the workplace. And that's what the labor movement's really all about, is really empowering workers to collectively bargain and win improvements and kind of, not, push back against, decades and decades we've seen recently where wealth inequality has surged. Billionaires are getting richer and richer. Even during the pandemic, billionaires increased their wealth by billions and billions of dollars, and workers lost billions of dollars in wages. So people are connecting the dots between that wealth redistribution to the top. And I think people are seeing the labor movement as really the best counter to that mechanism we're seeing in our society.
Right, and not to beat up on the unions, but we recognize that in terms of like the labor movement, how it had become marginalized by capitalism, in that a lot of the unions, major unions, had basically acquiesced on a lot of issues relative to workers. And now, how do you see COVID impacting the labor union? And we'll go from there to like the prison. How do you see COVID impacting the labor union?
I think, yeah, like you said, labor unions, just in recent times have made concessions and really upset rank and file workers. You saw that with the Teamsters. They brought in new leadership last year, and this time around at UPS, one of the biggest employers in the country. That leadership is now in line with the rank and file, and they're saying straight up, a year from now, if we you don't meet these demands, we're going to strike. So, and I think that's happening at the United Auto Workers. And I think we're seeing that now with groups like Starbucks Workers United, and a lot of other places that in Amazon Labor Union, they're not affiliated with the larger unions. So I think people are kind of wanting to redevelop that rank and file community and build it from the ground up rather than relying on larger, more established unions to kind of lead the way. And that's really how it's always been. The labor movement's going to be fueled by grassroots movements,
right.
not by leadership. So,
and I like that. I like that observation because they're going back to their roots, and like you say, rank and file, it's the people, that's the workers that's actually created the whole concept of getting treated better or equal wages. So it wasn't nobody in the corporate office of a labor union. It was somebody on the ground that felt like they should have been treated fair, and they organized. But let's look at the labor union as it relates to, and labor in particular as it relates to the prison industrial complex. And we recognize that the 13th Amendment legalized slavery, and that in legalization of slavery, we recognize now that the prison industrial complex is the new plantation, and the prisons are the chattel. And in 1970, the North Carolina prisoners made the first concerted effort to unionize. And this case went to the Supreme Court, which ultimately sided with the institution and corporate America in regards to not allowing prisoners to unionize. My question to you is, why do you think the institutions put up so much resistance to allow prisoners to come together and ask for or demand better working conditions and livable wages that they could ultimately save and impact their lives upon their return to society? Why do you think it's such a pushback? Because it's been going on since 1970 and probably beyond or before.
Well, I think that the main motive for suppressing workers, organizing and improving their working conditions within the prison industrial complex is, comes down to, I think there's a lot of reasons, but money's a big one. There was a report that came out a few months ago by a lot of researchers in ACLU, and it even mentioned that estimates are limited because there's so little reliable data on it. But, labor in the prison system produces at least $11 billion in revenue for the prison system. And a lot of that is to maintain this mass incarceration industrial complex, because it's very expensive to maintain and run these huge prisons. And in areas where poverty and jobs are hard to come by, so they kind of manufacture consent in that way. And a lot of companies, a lot of government agencies are profiting immensely off of prison labor. In many states, these workers aren't paid anything. They're not giving the option to turn down work. And if they try to, they can be sent to solitary confinement. They can be dinged in terms of parole. in terms of other, privileges. So, and they really have no rights in their working conditions. Not only do they not have the right to organize unions, they don't have the right to safe working conditions. All those OSHA laws, the states, workplace safety laws, they don't. They're not enforceable under prisoners. I just in my work, I've seen a lot of places. Like there's a huge egg farm in Arizona that employs hundreds of prisoners, and people lose fingers, they lose arms, they get seriously injured, and they really have no rights in those cases. That typically a worker would find available to them if they were outside of prison. So I think governments, companies, agencies, and the system in general has viewed prisoners as this really cheap labor tool, and I think suppressing that and keeping that gravy train running for these people is the driving force to suppressing any efforts to reform or improve the working conditions and the wages within those systems.
And as you was outlining that, it established the hypocrisy of this country, because everything you said was the reason why unions came into existence in this country, because of workers wanting to be treated fairly. When we look at the prison industrial complex, I worked in an industry in the Maryland, and they changed their name from one thing to Maryland Correctional Enterprise, and when they became and what they get, and this is a general principle throughout the United States when it comes to the prison industrial complex, with the institution, with these industries do, they get priority over government contracts or state contracts. And like in the case of Maryland Correction Enterprise, they got contracts over all the state clothes. They make all the state clothes. They do all the furniture for for colleges and the legislation. That's the wood shop. And they make tags for the state of Maryland and beyond. And I worked in a tag shop, and to say you was actually pressing tags, that's seemed like something out of a James Cagney era. But yeah, we was pressing tags. But let's look at some of the things that we've been doing, prisoners have been doing to try to bring attention to this injustice and the inhumanity that's being inflicted on. I recall that I think it was 2016 or in 2016, prisoners in San Quentin called for a nationwide strike, labor strike, to protest the living conditions, the working conditions. Do you have any information on that, or are you aware of that, and do you want to comment on it?
I mean, unfortunately, I don't, but I think just a big part of just the lack of attention on it is because, these workers are in prison that, even as a reporter, I've had difficulty getting in touch with people in prison because, if I write a letter asking them, oh, can you talk about, your working conditions, even if it does get through the screening process, because a correctional officer is going to read that, and based on their interpretation, they're going to decide whether they're going to, wave it through or not. And on the other end, those workers are at risk of, severe retaliation if they do speak out. Unfortunately, during instances where you do have workers that are organizing and calling for things like a strike, it's difficult to get the word out and get news and media coverage to cover those issues. And I think in the back end, part of that is really because this whole system is kind of done in secret. So like you said, the prison workers create all those things. But, you know, for the typical person that's getting a tag in the state of Maryland, you know, they're not going to be informed of who's making that, or, you know,
Right.
or, you know, if you're working in a state agency, they just give you a desk. They're not telling you, oh, a prisoner made this and was paid 20 cents an hour.
Right.
And even companies that have been caught using prison labor, they are always on the defensive. You know, I found it last year when I did a story on companies like Russell Stover using prison labor. They try to say like, oh, we're doing a good thing for them, but which is like, that's not true. If you're doing a good thing, then you wouldn't have the issue of not being able to find and retain enough workers, where you have to go to the prison system and then cut deals with the state prison system and pay those workers even less. And, you know, the state prison system gets a big chunk of that because they take out fees for boarding and fees for transportation and things like that. And workers aren't compensated, you know, for that time. And it's just all around, there's these gross human rights violations within these systems. And, you know, there's it's very difficult for people to speak up while in them. And, you know, and these products that are coming out of these systems, in, you know, even with this report that researchers took a long time getting into it, I've done Freedom of Information Act requests to kind of get some information on it. And it's just varies by different state. They won't even tell you, you know, how many workers are working
Right.
in prison, or, you know, there's no reliable specific data. So it's all, you know, really, you know, done in secret. And it's really just a matter of trying to peel back and figure out how expansive this system is, and kind of work locally and to kind of push for changes. And there have been, you know, some sort of, you know, this is the unfortunate thing. Everyone's kind of seen that that Netflix documentary on the 13th Amendment, and you know, the majority of America would support saying that that kind of exemption is ridiculous and needs to be amended. But because there's so little information available to the public about how these systems operate, that it kind of gets flown under the radar, and there's not a lot of political will or pressure to push for reforms and changes. And I think that needs to change, and, you know, we need to start figuring out on where we can raise these workers' voices and kind of you know, address the human rights violations that are going on a daily basis in this country.
And I think that's where we're trying to do with Rattling the Bars. We're trying to educate people to understand that, you know, you hear when a person is incarcerated and you get this distortion information coming out that when a person that's actually locked in and locked up is living a lavish life because they might have certain amenities that people in society might frown on. But when it comes down to prison labor and the exploitation of prisoners' labor, you have, it's systemic in the regard that in the federal system, they got unicorn, and unicorn is an industry that have first rights to all labor that the federal government want. So it could be anything from manufacturing wiring for jet planes to making spoons for the military, but anything that the federal government wants produced, unicorn has gotten a position where they get first priority over. Which brings me to this point: do you think that it should be a connection between the labor movement in society and there should be a coalition or an effort should be made to organize a relationship between both the union and the prison labor movement?
I absolutely do think so, because, you know, I think all the unions and everyone within the labor movement is kind of aware that our existing labor laws are antiquated. They're all developed in the 1930s. They have a lot of racist exemptions, not just for prison workers, but for farm workers, and gig workers and things like that. And I think you kind of have to start from the most exploited. I don't think ignoring large swaths of employees in this country, which it's like 2/3 or more of all prisoners in this country are working while in prison. So, and that's something that's completely ignored. By the labor movement. It's ignored in popular culture. You watch a TV show. I have never seen prisoners working or that kind of conditions. You watch Shawshank Redemption. I don't think movies like that. It's just like those things don't exist within those worlds. It's just completely disregarded and not looked into. And it's just, so I think a lot of people are either unaware of it or just completely disconnected from the violations of human rights and the exploitation that's going on within these systems. I mean, this is the worst of the worst. I mean, in the prison system, you basically have what the labor movement fought for over 100 years ago. It's just running full steam ahead and operating without any sort of oversight in terms of that. So,
right.
Yeah, the 13th Amendment was just a racist relic after the Civil War to appease
the South.
The South, and that's kind of spread around the country. It's not just in the South. The South. I think it is worse in terms of some of the conditions and some of the things they get away with. But New York State, for example, they were using prison labor to make hand sanitizers and things like that during the pandemic to make masks and things like that. Like you said, anything the government wanted to be made cheaply and quickly. They have prison workers to do that without anyone speaking up for those workers. They have no voice. They have no one on their side defending them or saying these need to be the parameters or the conditions where that's made. It's just no, it's all up to those prison systems to impose those conditions and the productivity quotas onto those workers.
And you know what, we was organized in Maryland in particular, and we was trying to organize the union for the metropolitan bus system. And so we did a survey, and the design of the survey was to see how many metro workers had family members that were incarcerated. And we found out in the metropolitan, dealing with the metro transit system, we found out that 75% of the members of the union had family members that are incarcerated, which opens the door for the conversation on how many people throughout the country, family members that are incarcerated that are in unions. Have you ever considered looking into that, or have you ever come across that in your journalism or your reporting?
I haven't come across it, but I think that's just it is a really interesting, aspect. And I think it's just something that labor unions should kind of, look into more and kind of figure out ways to expand and not just focus on, their memberships, because labor unions, especially the large ones, they are politically involved, but prison labor has not been on their radar. I haven't seen I haven't seen a labor union address it at all, and it affects them whether they like it or not. Like whether their members have family members incarcerated, or a lot of these prisoners are being forced to do jobs that could be union jobs, but
Right.
where I live in Florida, if you're driving around Florida, you can see a sign that says prison labor, and they're doing construction,
Yeah.
and they're getting paid, pennies on the dollar for, typically the construction industry workers, labor unions have been pushing to, organize that. It's pretty well organized in many parts of the country. And those workers, get paid good wages, and, but I mean, these are just parts of the economy where, kind of their labor unions are kind of, missing opportunities, I think, to raise, all boats, and kind of not only improve the lives of their members, but of, communities, because I think, people are starting to become aware of that. Just having these systems work in communities. I've seen, where I live in Gainesville, Florida, there's been a lot of local activism against the University of Florida using companies that rely on prison labor, things like that, and that's been over the past few years. Like Whole Foods got in, big trouble for sourcing food that was made in Colorado using prison labor. I think it needs to extend beyond those holding companies accountable to holding systems accountable, where we're pressuring the politicians and the public agencies that have the authority and the power to make reforms and changes to do so.
Right. And I think that's a good observation, because when we look at the unions, and as you just observed, a lot of the labor that's being provided by prisoners is contracts that legitimate unions could have, but the capitalist America and corporate America, they have like do an end around by using prison labor. One, you don't have to give them no health benefits. Two, you don't have to have no binding contract with them. Three, you don't have to give them like a living wage. It's a whole myriad of things that you don't have to do with prisoners that you have to do with people in society. And I think that labor movement would be really well served if they really did look at or make a connection between uh, the labor movement in prison and the labor movement overall. But Mike, you had the last word on this. What you want to tell our viewers about this upcoming Labor Day, and how they should look at understanding labor and the Labor Day and the labor movement?
I think people just need to be more aware of how expansive the labor movement is in far reaching in terms of our society. And it's not just, people think of the typical job. It's a lot more than that. And just prison labor, and all the different kinds of exploitative labor that comes out of the prison system, because it's not just those in prison. Workers are exploited when they come out of prison. They're exploited, in the beginnings of the prison system. A couple of years ago, there's, in Mississippi, there was a big story that came out where jails were using local employers and forcing people to work off debts from, fines and fees. So and fines and fees are a big part of that as well. It just how it's expensive to be poor in this country, and that is exploited, and those groups of people are exploited by the prison system. So it's not just labor, it's not just companies like McDonald's that are exploiting workers, it's our public institutions as well. And I think that awareness needs to come off. It's not just the corporations are the face of capitalism, and there's certainly merit, criticism, and anger from the public, but I think more so it's our public institutions that enable and empower those corporations, and really do the same kind of exploitative practices that people hate Amazon for. I think it's just becoming more aware of that, and just, learning and figuring out, if there are politicians receptive to this, and what's going on. And that's been the case. I think it's been difficult, and a lot of, there's only a few people speaking up, and those that don't get a lot of attention for it. And, I found this in covering, who were the politicians that were pushing for police reform, and while Democrats and Republicans have been trying to get cops more money, and that comes on the back end in terms of, if you're giving cops more money, they're going to put more people in prisons, and that's and that's what's been happening. Our prison population has been, increasing under Biden, and who's talking about that, who's criticizing that and holding them accountable. And just because they have a D next to their name, it's not something that should go without pushback.
Right. There you have it. The real news about Labor Day. Marx has coined the term "Workers of the World Unite." And this Labor Day, we want to emphasize that when we look at the corporate America and capitalism, we all recognize that in this country, it's a lot of poor people, a lot of people in society that don't have living wages and can't get living wages because of corporate America and capitalism and the scientific manner in which they're busting unions. But more importantly, we have to recognize also that 1.2 million people are incarcerated, and that's free labor for corporate America. And at the expense of people in society that could have them jobs and get living wages, and more importantly, could help to abolish the prison industrial complex and end slavery as we know it. Thanks, Mike, for coming on and joining us for Rattling the Bars.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And I urge everyone to continue to support the real news and continue to support Rattling the Bars. You can go to our website and on learning how you can support us and continue to support the real news and continue to rattle the bars. Thank you.